Between 2008 and 2012, Kuliaakan had mornings that people still avoid talking about. You'd wake up, step outside, and the whole city felt off. Streets cut off without warning, police blocking bridges before sunrise, neighbors whispering instead of asking questions. And every so often, local papers would quietly report the same thing. 3 bodies here, 5 bodies there, always left in places where everyone would see them, but no one would dare describe them. Those scenes didn't come out of nowhere. They were part of a conflict that left more than 2,000 people dead in the region. And whenever one of those mornings happened, a name would slip into the conversation in the same low, careful tone: Los Antrax. Inside that group was a man people in Kuliaakan knew without actually knowing. His work showed up long before his face ever did. Between 2008 and 2012, he was tied to a series of hits that pushed back rival groups and helped redraw territory. Operations carried out at night, quickly, quietly, without the loud chaos people usually imagine. That man was Chino Ántrax, Sinaloa's highest-ranking hit squad leader. What caught everyone off guard was the contrast. The person blamed for some of the cartel's most precise operations lived nothing like a hidden gunman. He traveled the world, stayed in suites, showed off cars, watches, yachts. He documented everything. And somehow, that double life, silent on the streets, loud everywhere else, became the thread that would eventually lead to his end. By 2008, daily life in Kuliaakan had already begun to fracture. What started as a political dispute inside the Sinaloa Cartel had turned into a violent rupture with the Beltrán Leyva organization. The consequences spread fast. Between 2008 and 2012, more than 2,000 deaths were recorded across the region. Ambushes, disappearances, nighttime incursions. For the people living there, the signs of another violent night were easy to read. Bridges blocked before dawn, patrol cars sealing streets, neighbors whispering instead of speaking openly. In those tense years, a name began circulating softly, never loudly: Los Antrax. They weren't just an armed wing. Inside Kuliaakan, people understood they were the Zambada faction's tactical shield, a group that moved more quietly, more precisely than most. And at the center of that group was someone the city had known since he was a boy: Jose Rodrigo Arechiga Gamboa, later known as El Chino Ántrax. His path into the cartel world didn't start with ambition or violence. For a long time, he tried to build a normal life. He studied architecture, held different jobs, and kept distance from the criminal world he'd grown up beside. But pressures mounted, financial problems, expectations he couldn't meet, a future that seemed to shrink instead of open. When he found himself backed into a corner, he did what many young men in Sinaloa do when legitimate options disappear. He turned to the people next door. And in his case, next door meant the Zambada family, neighbors he had known since childhood, the same house he had walked into his entire life. Between 2006 and 2008, his work inside the organization had nothing to do with weapons. He handled logistics, transport routes, shell companies, trucking operations that blended perfectly with legitimate commerce. The systems he created allowed shipments to cross from Sinaloa into the United States with minimal suspicion. It wasn't flashy work, but it was effective, and effectiveness rarely goes unnoticed. Vicente Zambada Niebla, El Vicentillo, saw value in him, and from that moment, Chino entered the inner circle. Everything changed in January 2008. The alliance between the Sinaloa Cartel and the Beltrán Leyva organization collapsed, triggering a brutal conflict across Sinaloa, Sonora, and Durango. Territory shifted weekly. Internal hierarchies collapsed and reformed constantly. Operators who had never handled violent tasks suddenly found themselves pulled into them. In that chaos, Chino adapted quickly. His understanding of logistics translated into strategy. When the Zambadas needed a defensive unit, he became the natural choice to organize and lead it. Between 2008 and 2012, authorities would later connect him to at least 22 targeted hits against rival factions. These weren't chaotic shootouts. They were tactical moves executed at moments that mattered. In 2009, 4 rivals were eliminated in a nighttime operation in Navolado. In early 2010, 5 more were taken out in Costa Rica, Sinaloa, in an operation that lasted minutes but stabilized a key route. In 2011, 3 additional rivals were killed in coordinated strikes across northern Kuliaakan. These were operations designed to recover ground without sparking larger battles. Several mornings in 2009 and 2011 revealed what the war looked like to the public. Local reports quietly mentioned bodies found on overpasses. 3 here, 4 there, sometimes 5, left in places where no one could ignore them. Notes were sometimes discovered, but their contents rarely reached print. Inside the city, people didn't need the details. They already knew who had left the warnings. The conflict also hit Chino's own ranks. In 2010, El Pocho Antrax, one of the group's early members, died after a prolonged confrontation that lasted hours. Months later, Pancho Arce was gunned down while playing indoor soccer at a sports facility in Kuliaakan. 3 others died with him. These losses cut deep, but rather than weakening Los Antrax, they hardened the group. Chino reorganized, redistributed roles, and tightened discipline. His approach differed from figures like Labarbi or the Zeta's loudest factions. He favored method over spectacle, control over chaos. By 2012, a new challenge emerged, not from outside the cartel, but inside. The faction close to El Chapo Guzman started viewing Los Antrax as too loyal to El Mayo and too autonomous. That year, 4 members disappeared, including Roque Landeros. No explanations. In the world they operated in, disappearances were messages. While internal tensions rose, Chino's personal life seemed to move in the opposite direction, far from secrecy. Between 2010 and 2013, he traveled more than 45 times through 14 countries: Dubai, Paris, Rome, Barcelona, Monte Carlo, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Athens, Cairo. He stayed in 5-star hotels, enjoyed private yacht rentals costing between $10,000 and $25,000 a day, and wore watches priced between $30,000 and $45,000. His garage included a $200,000 Lamborghini Gallardo, a $450,000 Mercedes SLR McLaren, and several armored SUVs worth over $300,000 combined. He documented everything, posting more than 300 photos online. He never showed his full face, but he always wore the same skull ring. It became his unofficial signature, and ultimately, the detail that betrayed him. On October 18, 2013, his name circulated quietly after a shocking event. During a private party in Los Cabos with more than 100 guests, Francisco Rafael Arellano Felix, one of the original leaders of the Tijuana cartel, was killed by a disguised gunman. Authorities never publicly linked Chino to the hit, but inside the cartel world, people believed he had the access required for something that precise. By late 2013, the DEA had already built a case against him. After tracking him for months, they alerted Dutch authorities that a Mexican national traveling with a false identity would land in Amsterdam on December 31st. As he stepped off the plane, he was detained. Even though he had altered his appearance and used documents belonging to a dead man, the skull ring confirmed who he was. He was extradited to the United States on July 10, 2014. The following day, he faced a federal judge. At first, he pleaded not guilty, but on March 20, 2015, he changed his plea, admitting to trafficking charges and acknowledging violent activities tied to the cartel. What mattered most to U.S. authorities was the information he provided. His cooperation weakened operators in California, Arizona, and Nevada, affecting branches tied to both El Mayo and El Chapo. When his sentence came, 6 years in prison and 5 years of supervised release, people inside Sinaloa understood what had happened. Deals with the U.S. always carry consequences. In March 2020, he was released under strict supervision. He wasn't allowed to move more than 500 meters from his home in California. Yet in early May, he vanished. Days later, he appeared in Kuliaakan, staying quietly at his sister's house. On May 15th, a black SUV was found abandoned. Inside were 3 bodies, his sister's, and her husband's, all tortured, all executed. There were no suspects, no arrests, no official reconstruction. Just silence. And in Sinaloa, silence usually means the people who needed to act already did. Whether the order came from Los Chapitos, from El Mayo's circle, or from a rare alignment of interests, the message was the same. He had crossed lines he couldn't walk back from. He cooperated with the U.S. He lived too publicly, and he returned home without the guarantees someone in his position would have needed to survive. To this day, his death remains surrounded by the same ambiguity that followed many of his operations: rumors, fragments, and unanswered questions. A story that ended exactly where it began, quietly in Kuliaakan, when his body was found, wrapped, and left inside an abandoned SUV on the edge of Kuliaakan. Nobody believed it was a random killing. Not in that city. Not with his history. People didn't react with surprise, just with that familiar look, like they'd seen something inevitable finally arrive. But inevitable doesn't mean clear. There were no arrests, no suspects, no official story to follow. Just silence. And in Sinaloa, silence usually means someone powerful wanted it that way. Some point to Los Chapitos, remembering old tensions and the independence Los Antrax once had. Others look toward the people closest to El Mayo, saying Chino came back without permission, without guarantees, after cooperating with the U.S. There's even a third version, quiet, uncomfortable, suggesting both sides might have found a rare moment of agreement. The truth is, nobody outside those circles knows, and the people who do aren't speaking. So his ending sits there, half finished. A man who lived loudly online, who moved quietly in war, and who died in a way that leaves more questions than answers. And maybe that's why his story refuses to close. Who ordered it? Who allowed it? And why did he return to a place where he knew he had no margin for mistakes? You tell us, what do you think really happened? If you want more stories where power shifts in the dark and loyalties don't last forever, remember to subscribe. Hidden archives will be here, opening the files others prefer to leave untouched.